Great. Okay. So thank you so much, Emily, for the lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Today, I would like to share with you a research paper that I'm working on with Rory Coulter and Daisy Van Court about the longitudinal relationship between volunteering and mental well-being with a 10-year follow-up, and to understand whether the relationship varies by birth cohorts and neighborhoods. So volunteering is defined as individuals giving time and labor voluntarily for community services, which spans a wide range of activities, both online and offline, including providing support for neighbors, relatives, and friends, volunteering at local library, offering help at an animal shelter or at a community center, teaching people about voting registration, fundraising and donations, and providing emotional support through helpline services. And these activities can be actioned at individual, community, national, and global levels, and have been perceived as an important asset for individual and community well-being. So currently, there are more than 1 billion people volunteer all over the world. And particularly in the UK, around 20 million adults have taken part voluntary work in 2019. And this large scale of volunteering was continued to be seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, where in the first few months of the outbreak, UK had over 1 million people registering third sector groups, such as the Royal Voluntary Service. And there were over 3,000 self-organized mutual aid groups to support the community during the pandemic. So previous studies have shown that volunteering helps improve and supports mental, social, and physical well-being. For example, for mental well-being, a report of over 10,000 participants commissioned by the National Council for Voluntary Organization shows that the majority of volunteers felt happy, well-supported, recognized, and belonged. They also reported a feeling that engagement had improved their mental well-being and health. And in line with this report, a systematic review with participants aged over 50 also shows that taking part in voluntary work helps increase their life satisfaction and confidence and decrease their depression. And similarly, a longitudinal study in the US found that the participating in volunteering mitigates the negative effects of adults' low self-esteem on their senses of belonging and life satisfaction. And also for young adults aged around 18 to 24, volunteering helps introduce their loneliness. And volunteering also provides opportunities for people experiencing stressful events to cope with their emotions, such as cancer and during a pandemic. And in terms of social well-being, volunteering offers opportunities to meet new people, enhance social bonding and connectedness, and provide social rewards. And all of this helps improve individual social capital. For example, there is a study on marginalized people found that volunteering in nature helps enhance social reintegration through improving relations with others from different backgrounds and improving social and employable skills. And finally, volunteering is also associated with better physical well-being, including decreases in the rates of functional decline, cortisol reactivity to stressor, and cardiovascular risk amongst adolescents. And it also helps increase in physical activity, strength, and walking speed. And most of these impacts were found in both experimental studies and cohort studies, which suggests that the association between volunteering and well-being may be causal. However, there has been some research suggesting that these benefits may be stronger amongst older populations. For example, the bar chart here from a survey conducted in Scotland shows that mental health appears to be better for older volunteers aged 55 or above compared to younger volunteers aged 16 to 24. And this is in line with a systematic review, which also found that older adults may be more likely to experience reduced functional dependency and fewer depressive symptoms than younger counterparts. Also, a life course analysis shows that the association between volunteering and well-being did not emerge until individuals reached 40 years and continued up to old age. So one possible explanation for this could be that older volunteers may simply have engaged in the voluntary work at a longer period or at a greater frequency, perhaps due to extra time from retirement, which in turn may lead them to enjoy greater positive impacts from the experience. However, there are also other studies suggested that these impacts could already be seen even with only small amounts of volunteering, and that spending too much time volunteer that it became another commitment could actually have adverse effects on health and well-being. But the age differences shown here may also be explained by a cohort effect, especially when the social meaning of volunteering has been redefined constantly across years. So volunteerism has a long history which can be dated back in the medieval times, when churches were responsible to help the sick and the poor. Then the development of volunteerism continues to grow during the World Wars and boomed in the 1960s when the number of volunteers and third sector communities increased significantly. And since then, volunteerism appeared to carry different roles in society. So to give you some examples, in the 1960s, the British government used volunteering as a way to support welfare services, address community problems, and importantly, tackle youth disaffection. Then fast forward to the 1980s, the focus on volunteering had been shifted to respond to mass unemployment through the linkage of community services training and job creation schemes for the unemployed. Then with decreases in unemployment rates and a growing government interest in active citizenship in the 1990s, volunteering was perceived as a tool to combat social exclusion, pursue the idea of community, and enhance social capital. And then entering the 2000s, there has been a surge in promoting health and well-being through volunteering, which has been included in the social prescribing schemes as an activity to improve social, mental, and physical well-being. So given that people's behaviors could be influenced by social structures and changes, it is plausible that the way volunteering is promoted and delivered may influence the engagement rates and therefore the associated health well-being outcomes. Therefore, we would like to examine the relationship between volunteering and well-being through the lens of the cohort effects by splitting the sample into different cohorts. In addition to the social context relief, physical contexts such as area deprivation, crime and safety, and transport link can also affect our engagement in voluntary work. So for example, studies have shown that people were more likely to volunteer in safer areas with stronger sense of community connectedness, and also neighborhoods with more community facilities and services. And these characteristics may be less likely to be found in deprived areas. And indeed, in England, there is evidence that volunteering tended to be lower in more deprived areas, which may be due to a lack of voluntary organizations in more deprived neighborhoods. Such unequal distribution in the engagement may potentially influence the strength of the volunteering well-being association. So the current study was designed to explore how changes in volunteering are related to changes in mental distress and health-related quality of life over 10 years, and to understand how the association may vary across cohorts and across levels of society, waves 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, and merge the data with the LSO waves due data, which provide information on levels of area deprivation. We built the model sequentially, where we first controlled for age, partnerships, state and status, and finally we included a weather response So fixed effects analysis was used in our study, which automatically controlled for all time invariant variables and important observed time-changing variables mentioned earlier. The full sample was stratified into 4 generations: the pre-1945, those who were born before 1945, baby boomers, those who were born between 1945 and 64, Gen X, those who were born between 1965 and 1979, and the millennials, those who were born in 1980s or after. So our results show that after controlling for all time invariant variables and social demographic and area deprivation time-changing variables, volunteering was associated with lower levels of mental distress for the baby boomers generation. And the negative association was also seen for the pre-1945 generation, although it was weaker after controlling for time-changing variables. No associations were found when examining the full sample, nor for the Gen X and the millennial generations. We also found that volunteering engagement was associated with improved health-related quality of life across 10 years. And notably, the positive associations were also found for the pre-1945 and baby boomers generations. There was also some indication that volunteering engagement improved quality of life amongst the millennials generation. However, the association was weakened after controlling for time-changing variables. When looking at the neighborhoods, we found that the association between volunteering and mental well-being seems to be associated with levels of deprivation, and particularly differences between volunteers and non-volunteers appear to be more salient in more deprived areas. However, when controlling for the covariates, we found no interaction effects. Despite this, the positive impacts of volunteering continues to be seen for older generations. And this suggests that these impacts can be found even amongst people living in the 20% most deprived areas. So these results are encouraging because many people of these generations are going to enter or are already in retirement. So continuation to support participation will help maintain their mental well-being and mental health and help achieve successful aging. However, the unequal distribution of volunteering may mean that only some people, usually those who have higher education levels or living in wealthier areas, would experience these benefits, and therefore reproducing the health inequalities across places. It has actually been estimated that the 20% most deprived areas have around 63% fewer voluntary organizations than the least deprived areas. And so to tackle this, it is important to ensure that adequate opportunities and resources are provided, including well-maintained voluntary organizations, safe neighborhoods, sufficient public funding, wide-ranging voluntary activities, flexible volunteering hours, and strong social bonding across neighborhoods with different levels of area deprivation. So overall, our findings are in line with previous research, which has demonstrated the effects of volunteering on individuals' well-being, with evidence pointing to the stronger effects amongst older generations when compared to younger adults. This can be understood through the lens of age and cohort effects. So age effects are found when changes in physical, social, mental, and behavioral experiences are linked to aging, but not really related to birth cohorts to which people belong. So previous research identified a number of mechanisms to understand how the experience of volunteering improves mental health and well-being. And some of these mechanisms may be especially relevant for older adults. For example, for older generations, volunteering may have offered them opportunities to build new connection with others as a way to compensate for the social networks that they might have lost through life transitions, such as retirement or family changes. Volunteering may also help older adults, especially those who have retired or unemployed, form a new social roles and group identity, as well as providing a sense of structure to volunteers' lives if engaging routinely. In contrast, many key ingredients such as personal development, relationships, values, and identities that link volunteering to health and well-being for younger adults could be experienced through education, employment, and family responsibilities, which have also been reflected in our analysis, where the association between volunteering and health-related quality of life was weakened after considering time-changing demographic and socioeconomic factors, such as household composition and employment status. As a result, the impacts of volunteering may be weakened for younger cohorts. But we can also see this relationship through another lens, which is the cohort effect, where the effects of volunteering on the outcomes varies based on the birth year. So volunteerism, as discussed earlier, is socially constructed, which has been used as a tool by the government to tackle social issues, including youth disaffection in the 1960s and mass unemployment in the 1980s. The social meanings of volunteering, alongside with initiatives and programs that encourage the engagement, could potentially influence how people think about volunteering and also their behavior and the associated outcomes. In addition to this, the changes in social and political context could also influence volunteering engagement. So, for example, the introduction of 0 hours contracts and the lack of provision of secure social housing starting in the 1990s may have made it challenging for adults in younger generations to commit to volunteering on a regular basis or to be involved in voluntary activities within the neighborhoods. And infrequent voluntary involvement may have weakened the benefits of the engagement. It is also possible that people who were born in different generations may have collective characteristics, which may in turn affect the rate of engagement and its associated outcomes. For instance, older generations such as the pre-1945 and baby boomers generations were categorized as committed and disciplined, who enjoy direct and in-person communications, as opposed to younger generations who grew up in a time when technology was advancing fast and who were categorized as more individualist. So as a result, it is possible that while older generations may involve in volunteering to support society, younger generations may have used volunteering as a way to improve their well-being and support personal development. So different rationales for volunteering may influence the types of outcomes that they receive. While our study has a large sample size and used fixed effects analysis to effectively control for covariates and provide an alternative explanation to explain the association between volunteering, well-being, and age through the lens of cohort effects, it has some limitations. So first, as this study examined parallel longitudinal relationship, the causal inferences were unable to be established. However, the findings of this study were in line with experimental research. Also, while as we examined and compared the associations with different birth cohorts, there may be a risk of selection bias where the analysis for older generations may include respondents who survived, which are people who were healthier physically and mentally, and therefore a stronger well-being effect found amongst older generations. Also, this study was unable to disentangle the cohort effects from the age effects. Rather, it provided an additional perspective to explain the stronger benefits of volunteering that are usually found in older adults. So future research is needed to effectively examine which effect actually contributes more to the volunteering way of well-being relationship. And more studies are also required to take into account of the frequency of engagement. For example, whether people engage one-off or weekly or yearly in order to experience the benefits, as well as the variety of voluntary activities, especially we now can volunteer through the internet, because these may influence volunteers' health and well-being. And finally, in our moderating analysis, we only focus on neighborhoods where people lived instead of where they volunteered. Whereas people tend to volunteer within their local communities, it is also possible that people may travel to a different neighborhoods where more opportunities are provided.
It looks like we might have lost Karen for a minute there.
Okay, so to quickly to wrap up, our study shows that participating in volunteering helps reduce mental distress and improve health-related quality of life, especially for people from older generations, and that these benefits can be found across neighborhoods with different area deprivation, either in the 20% most deprived areas or less deprived areas. Given that voluntary work could support health and well-being with added values of improving civic participation, research on volunteering could benefit the leveling up agenda that aims to tackle social inequalities and strengthen community resilience. Also, understanding how volunteering impacts age groups differently is important for the current public health initiatives, such as the social prescribing schemes, to help design more targeted community-based activities for different generations, and in particular to help ensure successful aging. Thank you so much for listening to the presentation.